paper reports that two of the male prostitutes were given a late-night tour of the White House last year.
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers.
I want the truth.
You can't handle the truth.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Nick Bryant podcast. Tonight, my guest is Jeff Masson. He is a scholar who's written 31 books on many, many different topics. And I'm really glad to have him on my podcast tonight. How you doing, Jeff?
Great. Thank you, Nick. It's a pleasure to be talking to you.
He's coming to me all the way from down under in Australia.
That's right. Sydney, Bondi Beach.
Jeff has had a fascinating intellectual odyssey. I'm just looking at his odyssey. It truly is remarkable. His parents were, you grew up in Chicago, right? You were born in Chicago?
I was born in Chicago, but I grew up in California.
California? And there was a mystic named Paul Brunton who was English, but he had kind of an esoteric understanding of Hinduism, and he had a following, and your parents were actually followers of his.
That's right.
And he thought that the Third World War was imminent. So he went to Uruguay, and consequently, your parents went to Uruguay, and consequently, you and your sister went to Uruguay.
That's right.
And how long were you in Uruguay?
2 years. And then at that time, I still believed that Paul Brunton was a genuine mystic, and that he claimed to have evidence that a Third World War was coming. He had sources in Washington, but he also claimed he had sources. He was trying to talk to the four archangels who would protect the world, but he was not succeeding. And so we should get the hell out of Kansas and move to Uruguay, which we did. So we were there for 2 years, and then I realized I was now 20 years old. I was a very naive 20-year-old. When I look at my son when he was 20, how much more sophisticated he is. But I still believed all this nonsense. And nevertheless, I applied to go to Harvard and got in, and wound up at Harvard studying Sanskrit, because this is what the guru wanted me to study so that I could take his place one day. And the Sanskrit was philologically oriented. The professor Daniel H. Ingalls would have none of spirituality and made fun of me, quite rightly, for asking him the very first day, "Who's your guru?" And he said, "Do you mean who taught me Sanskrit?" I said, No, your spiritual guru. "Well, Mr. Masson, I don't have a spiritual guru." "Oh, you can just call me Jeff and I'll call you Dad." "No, you're Mr. Masson and I'm Professor Ingalls." Great shock for me as a 20-year-old straight out of a warm Jewish family in Uruguay. But I did eventually become a skeptic. Took me a few years.
It's interesting. I told you I lived with an Indian guru, and he had some major chakra predilections and lower chakra predilections. And but when I got there, it was an incredible learning experience. It was kind of like a big bang. I was learning Eastern philosophy in a way that I never would have learned it. And
so you went to India, Nick?
No, he's got the Swami Rama had an ashram in Honesdale, Pennsylvania.
I see. Okay.
And he had been at the Manager Foundation in Topeka, Kansas, where they research paranormal abilities. And he had stopped his heart at will and changed the temperature of his hand at will, and then produced various brainwaves at will. And so he had a huge following of like MDs, intellectual types. And I showed up. They needed big white boys to build stuff. I mean, a lot of the, which I do believe is a cult, a lot of the cult were like kind of skinny academic types. And I was 19 years old and big and strong. And they said, we need you to build stuff. And I said, okay, I'll build stuff. And then that's, and I actually started to study Sanskrit, but then my studies were truncated by me finding out that my guru was, had those major lower chakra predilections.
Let's clarify here. The chakra is supposed to start in the base of the spine and rise right up outside of the brain. So at the base of the spine is where your sexual organs are. And I guess most gurus in my view and in my experience get stuck down there. I have not hardly ever known a guru who didn't take advantage of the fact that women like the idea of sleeping with God.
Well,
and they like to present themselves as God.
Well, Swami Rama had a nice rap with the girls. He said, we were lovers in a past lifetime, and now I'm here to be your lover and guide you spiritually. And I left there with some bitterness because I wasn't treated very well when I was leaving, and I was just a kid. I was a teenager still, and I looked into a lot of other gurus after that, and they were all of them had lower chakra. Those, at least the Indian ones, had lower chakra predilections. I didn't hear of one that didn't. So.
No, I don't know it. And I thought of, after I wrote a book about my father's guru, called My Father's Guru, A Journey Through Spirituality and Disillusion. The one thing that I have to say for Paul Brunton, the guru, is he did not have that particular problem, as far as I know. He had many, many others. He claimed to have his PhD. I kept saying, why do you call yourself Dr. Brunton? He said, well, I have a PhD. And I said, where from? And he said, from the Astral University. And I said, well, that's not valid here in the United States. And I was running into lots of problems with him. He couldn't drive a car, and I remember asking him why not. And he said, well, Jeffrey, I was very young at the time. I couldn't have been more than 13. He said, Jeffrey, there are no cars on Venus. I said, do you mean you come from Venus? And he smiled mysteriously. And I bought all this nonsense, as children will. I think this is part of the problem, Nick. When you're young, and, what is youth? I mean, it could be anywhere up to the 20s, because I certainly was not intellectually formed till I was about 24, 25, and therefore open to suggestions of all kinds. And I believe that Paul Brunton, he said, I'll take you to different planets. I said, great, when do we go? I believed everything he told me until I was about 20. Until I was about 22, and then he said, you're becoming skeptical. I don't like that. And I said, well, I've been studying Sanskrit at Harvard, and you claim to know it, but you don't know it. I know that for a fact. And then he said, well, what if I were to raise this very heavy table in the air and you could see it dance? Would you drop some of your skepticism? Yeah, that would do it. So he said, okay, we're going to do that. And there were about 10 of us sitting around the table. And he said, now close your eyes. And everybody closed their eyes except me. I wanted to see what he did. And he was a tiny little guy, couldn't have been more than 5 feet tall and very thin. And he took his little hands and tried to shake the table. And he said, I feel the table moving. The spirits are coming. And I, like an idiot, I said, well, I'm not surprised. You're moving it. And then, oh, what? Now you frightened the spirits away. And it was very bad manners. But that was the end of my discipleship. That was it.
So did your parents remain with the guru after you split?
Well, that's interesting. They did until I wrote that book, which was quite late. I don't remember when it was first published, but quite, in the 80s at some point, or 70s. And his ex-wife, who remained a disciple of his, was deeply upset with my parents, never mind me, because my father had given me the letters that he had between him and PB and had talked to me in great detail. And my father remained attached to him in some strange way. And my mother less so, but my father very much, my sister not at all. And I think he was quite upset that they cut all relationships with him. So PB died before my book came out, but his son and many of his disciples remained. And of course, I became public enemy number one.